all dressed up, with not a few dollars to his name. The cashier's sneering remark, like a shard of broken glass, cut right into Arthur Pendleton's pride. It tore through the billionaire's seemingly impenetrable facade, revealing a man who was stripped bare and powerless. Arthur Pendleton strode into the convenience store with the self-assured air of a tech mogul. In his pocket was an entire billion-dollar empire, a massive fortune that could buy out this entire chain of stores. Yet, all he needed was a few dollars for a pack of cookies, and he didn't have any cash on him. The hushed whispers of the people around him were like tiny blades, cutting deeper into his humiliation. Ironically, this entire downfall began with a single pack of cookies. The 99th floor of the Pendleton Tech Tower wasn't an office. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, built to worship silence and power. Not a stray paper clip, not a single errant sound. The air was filtered to a sterile purity. At the center of this cold expanse, behind a polished black ebony desk, Arthur Pendleton was ending a call. On the massive screen, 3 pale, middle-aged men looked back at him. They were seasoned executives, veterans of countless market battles, but at this moment, they looked like schoolboys about to be expelled. "The decision has been made." Arthur's voice was even, as calm as a rippleless lake. "The R&D department's restructuring will begin on Monday. All 300 personnel on the Phoenix project will receive their termination notices." Mr. Pendleton, one man with salt and pepper hair, stammered, clinging to a last shred of dignity. "But they are exceptional engineers. Many have dedicated a decade to the company." Arthur slightly tilted his head, a small gesture that conveyed immense impatience. "Dedication does not translate into profit, Mr. Henderson. The Phoenix project has burned through $300 million without a single viable product. I don't run a charity." His eyes were like ice, piercing through the screen and extinguishing any hope of a counter-argument. "This meeting is over." He pressed the disconnect button before anyone could say another word. The 3 faces vanished, returning the wall to a solid black. The absolute silence descended once more. Arthur swiveled his chair, facing the immense glass wall. The entire city stretched out at his feet, a complex model of glittering skyscrapers and bustling traffic. He was the king of this kingdom, an empire built on lines of code and ruthless decisions. His gaze swept over the proud financial district, then traveled further toward a cluster of dilapidated houses, blurred by a haze of industrial smog to the east, Oakwood District. And then, something rare happened. His steely expression, forged through thousands of negotiations and firings, flickered. Just for a moment, a hairline crack no one could have possibly seen appeared on his perfect mask. Today was October 15th, the anniversary of his mother's death, Margaret. 15 years had passed since he left that squalid neighborhood with nothing but the clothes on his back and a vow never to return as a failure. He had kept his promise. He had come back, but on this peak, looking down on it as a distant memory, a scar that had long since healed. Yet today, that scar throbbed with a dull ache. A strange, illogical urge arose within him. He wanted to taste Sunbeam ginger cookies again. The cheap cookies his mother would buy him a packet of as a reward every time he brought home a perfect report card. It was a quiet ritual, a fragile thread connecting him to a past he had worked so hard to bury. An hour later, the sleek black sedan quietly left the Pendleton Towers garage. It glided along the broad boulevards like a predator on the hunt, then abruptly turned onto smaller, rougher roads. It was like a whale lost in a shallow river as it entered the territory of the Oakwood District. Arthur rolled down the window. The air was thick, carrying the scent of raw life, the smell of food from a street cart, the musty odor of old walls, the fumes of gasoline, and the scent of faded dreams. He parked in a secluded spot, a few blocks away. Taking off his designer jacket and wearing only a simple gray turtleneck sweater, he stepped out. For the first time in years, his $1,000 Italian leather shoes trod on the cracked, uneven pavement of his old neighborhood. He felt like a foreigner, an invisible tourist in his own memory. His destination appeared before him, Friendly Corner Grocery. The sign was faded, a few letters peeling off, but the name remained. The place seemed to have been forgotten by time. The automatic glass door made a creaking sound as he entered. Inside was a world completely different from the sterile environment of the 99th floor. The yellow fluorescent light cast a nostalgic glow over everything. Old pop music played from a tinny speaker mounted in the corner. The mixed scent of fresh vegetables, floor cleaner, and newly baked bread filled his nostrils. Arthur, despite his attempts to dress down, looked completely out of place. His tall stature, confident demeanor, and the expensive details of his attire made him stand out. People walked by, none of them recognizing the most powerful man in Silicon Valley, standing pensively in the dry goods aisle. He walked along the aisles, feeling a strange mix of unfamiliarity and uncanny familiarity. Finally, he found it. In the cookie aisle, humbly tucked away on the bottom shelf, were packets of Sunbeam ginger cookies. The orange-yellow packet with the smiling sun face was exactly as he remembered. Arthur crouched down, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked up the packet. The rustling of the plastic in his hand sounded like a whisper from the past. He closed his eyes. The image of his mother with her thin, frail hands and gentle smile appeared vividly. His heart, long hardened like stone, softened in a painful ache. "Mister, can you help me, please?" A voice, as clear as a bell, cut through Arthur's memories. He startled, opening his eyes and pulling himself back to reality. In front of him was a girl, about 6 or 7 years old, straining to reach a colorful dinosaur cereal box on a high shelf. A strangely familiar feeling urged him on. He stepped forward and gently took the cereal box down. "Here you go." A bright smile bloomed on the girl's face. That smile, radiant and pure as morning light, did something no billion-dollar contract could. It broke through the layer of ice that had encased Arthur's heart for so long. "Thank you, kind mister," the girl chirped. Her curious eyes glanced down at Arthur's basket, where only the single packet of Sunbeam cookies rested. "Oh, this cookie is so yummy. My mom always buys it for me when I get a perfect score on my tests." An innocent remark, a random coincidence. But for Arthur, it was like a lightning bolt. His whole body went rigid, a jolt running down his spine. His throat tightened. It was the exact same phrase, the exact same circumstance. The shock made his hand tremble, causing a can of soup he had absently put in his basket to slip and fall. Clang! The sound of the can rolling on the old tiled floor was jarring. Before Arthur could bend down, the little girl quickly picked it up. She held it with both hands, carefully offering it to him. "Here's your soup, mister." In that moment, when the little girl's small, warm fingers touched his hand, something inside the seemingly unshakable man broke. It wasn't an exchange. It wasn't a transaction. It was a connection, pure, unconditional. "Lily, you're bothering people again." A young woman with a gentle face rushed over. "I'm so sorry, sir. She's a bit too active." Arthur looked at the woman, then back at Lily, who was shyly hiding behind her mother's legs. He tried to find his voice. "No, it's okay," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "She's adorable." They exchanged brief, polite smiles. But this seemingly random encounter, tied together by a cereal box and a packet of cookies, had planted a seed of destiny. The stage was set, and the main act of Arthur's life was about to begin. The line at checkout counter number 3 moved slowly. Amidst the beeping of the barcode scanner and the complaints about prices, Arthur Pendleton felt more out of place than ever before. He was accustomed to things operating on his terms, every door opening for him, every line parting automatically. But here, he was just an anonymous link in a chain of people waiting. Standing right in front of him were Chloe and Lily. The little girl, Lily, occasionally turned her head, peeking at him with her large, round eyes, then, as if caught, quickly turned away, hiding her face in her mother's skirt, her 2 pigtails gently swaying. A smile briefly crossed Arthur's face, a genuine, unguarded smile. the kind his business partners would pay millions to witness. "That'll be $18.50. The cashier's voice rang out, pulling Arthur back to reality. He watched Chloe. She carefully took out a worn canvas wallet, opened it, and meticulously counted each bill. A $10 bill, a $5 bill, and the rest were crumpled $1 bills. She placed the money on the counter, her eyes lighting up with relief now that she had enough. A small, silent struggle that Arthur hadn't witnessed, or rather, had chosen not to see, for a very long time. "Next," the cashier called out, her voice flat and bored. It was Arthur's turn. He stepped up, placing the Sunbeam cookie packet and the can of soup on the conveyor belt. It was a laughable contrast to the overflowing carts of others. $4.75, the cashier announced without even bothering to look up. Arthur nonchalantly pulled out his crocodile leather wallet. Inside, there was no cash, only a row of glistening credit cards. He chose the most powerful one, the American Express Centurion card, also known as the Black Card. It was made of titanium, heavy and cold in his hand, a tangible symbol of his almost limitless wealth and status. He handed the card to the employee. The young woman, about 20 years old, with dyed auburn hair and heavily lined eyes, took the card. She glanced at it, then at Arthur, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Perhaps she had never seen a card like this in a humble supermarket. She swiped the card through the machine. A short, dry beep sounded. The small screen displayed 2 words in a glaring red. "Transaction denied." The cashier frowned. It must be a machine error. She swiped again, a little harder this time. Still the same indifferent beep, and the 2 hateful red words. "Your card is having issues," she said, her voice starting to show some frustration. The line behind them was getting longer. Arthur's brows furrowed, a vague sense of unease beginning to creep in. "That's impossible. This card never has issues. Try again." His voice maintained its usual commanding calm. Annoyed by his attitude, the girl swiped the card a 3rd time, more roughly. The result was unchanged. This time, she placed the card forcefully on the counter, making a sharp clack. "Denied. Do you have another form of payment? Cash, for instance?" Arthur was stunned. He suddenly remembered the brief conversation with his assistant this morning. "Sir, the bank is upgrading its anti-fraud system. There might be a few temporary transaction locks if they're made at unusual locations for verification. Would you like me to inform them in advance?" And he had waved it off. "No need. I don't plan on going anywhere out of the ordinary." A foolish mistake. And now, in his cashless world, he realized a naked truth. He didn't have a single bill in his wallet. I don't have any cash," Arthur stammered, feeling for the first time in his life a loss of control over such a trivial situation. The burning heat of embarrassment began to spread up his neck and face. The cashier's gaze swept from his polished leather shoes to his cashmere sweater and finally rested on Arthur's reddening face. A look of contemptuous and smug satisfaction appeared on her lips. She cleared her throat, deliberately speaking loudly so the impatient people behind him could hear. All dressed up with not a few dollars to his name. That remark, delivered with full scorn, was a match thrown into a powder keg. Whispers began to erupt from behind. "Oh, look at him, dressed to the nines and can't even pay. It's probably a fake. Look, someone's filming." Arthur glanced. Indeed, a young man was holding up his phone, a sneer on his face. The tech billionaire, who could buy and sell companies with a single signature, whose image was synonymous with success and power, was now exposed, helpless and humiliated, over a debt of less than $5. The shame surged like a tsunami, drowning him. He felt dozens of eyes stabbing at his back, judging, mocking. Just as Arthur felt himself sinking, he felt a gentle tug on his sweater. He looked down. It was Lily. The little girl was looking up at him, her big eyes holding no mockery, only pure concern. "Mister, are you okay?" Arthur didn't know how to answer. Lily turned to her mother, tugged on her sleeve, and whispered something urgent. Chloe bent down to listen, then looked at Arthur with a compassionate gaze. To everyone's astonishment, Lily reached up and placed her small, rabbit-shaped backpack on the counter. She busily unzipped it, taking out a faded pink plastic piggy bank. She opened the rubber stopper on the piggy bank's belly and turned it upside down. A cheerful, clear, clinking sound rang out, cutting through the malicious whispers. The little girl's last few coins spilled onto the counter, gleaming under the fluorescent light. There were quarters, dimes, and a few tarnished pennies. A small fortune. "Mom, use my money," Lily said loudly, her voice resolute and clear, overpowering the surrounding noise. "This mister is very kind. He got the cereal box for me." The little girl's action was like a miracle. The chattering crowd fell silent. The cashier's jaw dropped. The young man who was filming lowered his phone, looking dumbfounded. All eyes were no longer focused on Arthur's embarrassment, but on the pile of loose change and the determined face of the little girl, ready to give all she had. Chloe looked at Arthur, and in his eyes she saw not injured pride. She saw loneliness, confusion, and a hidden pain. She didn't hesitate. She gave a gentle, understanding smile and lightly pushed Lily's coins back into the little girl's palm. "Let me, honey. You save this money for books." Then she turned to Arthur, stepping forward to shield him from the curious eyes. She spoke to the cashier, her voice calm but firm. "I'll pay for him." She took a $5 bill from her wallet and placed it on the counter. Her action had no hint of charity. It was as normal and natural as helping a neighbor. For Arthur, this wasn't just a monetary transaction. It was a powerful statement of humanity, an act of unconditional kindness in a crowd poised to judge. It was a shock. In his world, nothing was free. But here, in the humblest of places, he received a priceless gift. His worldview, built on money and power, began to crack in that very moment. Arthur mechanically took the plastic bag and the change from Chloe's hand. He walked out of the supermarket's automatic door like a sleepwalker. The harsh afternoon sun of Oakwood hit his face, but he felt nothing. The noise of the street, the sound of cars, the shouts of children seemed to recede, muffled by the ringing of humiliation in his ears. In his hand, the plastic bag rustled, holding the proof of his helplessness, a packet of cookies and a can of soup, paid for by the kindness of a stranger. Chloe took Lily's hand and headed towards the old parking lot, where ordinary cars were parked side by side. They were about to disappear, to go back to their lives, and Arthur would return to his empire, carrying this scar of shame. No. Something inside him roared, his wounded pride, his habit of controlling everything, and perhaps a last glimmer of decency wouldn't allow him to let things end like this. He couldn't be indebted. Everything in Arthur's world was a transaction, a fair exchange. This debt, though only $4.75, felt as heavy as a stone on his chest. He had to erase it. "Wait," Arthur called out, his voice hoarse and louder than he intended. Chloe and her daughter startled and turned around. He strode quickly towards them, his face still tense. I have to pay you back. Please give me your address, or your account number. I'll transfer the money right away." Chloe looked at him, a little confused by the stranger's urgency. She waved her hand, offering a kind smile. "It's not that much. You don't need to worry about it. Just consider it me helping a neighbor." The word neighbor made Arthur freeze. He wasn't a neighbor. He was an intruder from another world. "No," Arthur insisted, his voice almost pleading. "Please, I won't be able to rest. I'm not used to owing anyone anything." Seeing the sincerity, the near anguish in his eyes, Chloe realized this was no longer about money. Perhaps for people like him, it was a matter of principle. She sighed, not wanting to make it difficult for him. "All right, if it makes you feel better," she said. "My house is nearby, number 12, Oakwood Street." She recited the address slowly and clearly. Each word, each syllable, struck Arthur's mind like a sledgehammer. Number 12, Oakwood Street. No, it couldn't be. His entire world shattered into glass shards. The blaring car horns, the sound of Lily chattering about something to her mother, all dissolved into a deafening silence. In his mind, only that address echoed, repeating like a ghostly incantation. It wasn't just an address. It was the smell of the rotting wood on the porch steps, the crack in the wall of the bedroom where he used to hide his secret treasures, the shadow of the old oak tree that fell across the yard every afternoon, the place where his mother took her last breath. He felt his throat go dry. A question escaped his lips, a question so absurd, so hauntingly specific, a last desperate attempt to cling to rationality, to prove that this was just a crazy coincidence. His voice was a distant rasp, as if echoing from a memory. The step, the third step, from the bottom. Is it still loose? Chloe's eyes widened in pure astonishment, without a hint of doubt. She nodded quickly. Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh, how did you know? My husband keeps meaning to fix it and keeps forgetting. Every time I stumble, I nag him about it. A chill ran down Arthur's spine. This was no coincidence. His voice trembled uncontrollably as he asked the next question, a question he both feared and longed to know the answer to. The Pendleton family. They used to live there, didn't they? The name Pendleton sounded so foreign coming from his mouth, as if he were talking about someone else. Chloe nodded, completely unaware of the seismic shift happening inside the man before her. Yes, they did. We bought the house from the bank a few years ago, after Mrs. Pendleton passed away. I heard she lived alone. She paused for a moment, squinting as if trying to recall the stories she had been told. The old neighbors here still talk about it. They said she had a very successful son, a tech billionaire or something, but they never saw him come back. Every one of Chloe's innocent words was an invisible knife, twisting deeper into a wound Arthur had tried to forget for 15 years. He could picture the neighbors gossiping, half proud, half reproachful about the lost son. Then Chloe continued, her voice softening, carrying the wistful sadness of an outsider. Mrs. Harris across the street said that Mrs. Margaret, his mom, had a habit before she passed. Every afternoon, she would bring an old chair out to the porch and sit, staring down the end of the street, right at the bend leading to the main road. She would just sit there for hours, as if she were waiting for him to come back. The image appeared in Arthur's mind, so vivid and excruciatingly painful, it was unbearable. His mother, alone, on the old porch, wearily waiting for a car that never appeared, waiting for a son who was busy building his empire on a foundation of forgetting. A sharp pain squeezed his heart. This was not a coincidence. This was a message from fate, a cruel and profound arrangement. The kindness he received today didn't come from a stranger. It came from the very house that had nurtured him. The child who saved him from humiliation was living in his old room. Kindness was germinated from the very land he had abandoned. The awakening began, not with a flash of light, but with a violent jolt. He had built a whole world, but he had lost his own home, both literally and figuratively. And today, that home had spoken, through the kindness of strangers, to call its prodigal son back. Arthur didn't sleep that night. He didn't return to his luxurious penthouse overlooking the glittering city. Instead, he drove to a modest hotel on the edge of the Oakwood district, renting a room with a window that looked out onto old rooftops. Night fell, but in Arthur's mind, a fierce dawn was breaking. He sat in the dark, the packet of Sunbeam cookies on the rickety table. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking like a CEO, wasn't calculating profit and loss. The numbers, the charts, the sharp business plans now seemed meaningless. He only thought of his mother's weathered but loving face, of Lily's radiant smile, and of Chloe's understanding eyes. He had built an empire to escape the past, but now he realized the past wasn't something to run from, it was the foundation, and his foundation had rotted from neglect. The next morning, a completely different Arthur Pendleton appeared at the door of 12 Oakwood Street. He was no longer the flustered billionaire in the supermarket, nor the cold CEO at the top of a tower. He wore a pair of old jeans, and a worn sweater that he hadn't touched in over a decade, something his assistant would probably have thrown away without a second thought. He didn't drive the sleek black sedan, but a normal pickup truck he had rented early in the morning. He knocked on the door. Chloe opened it, her hands still wiping on her apron. She was surprised to see the man from yesterday, but today he looked so different. The aloofness and power had vanished, replaced by a raw, approachable presence and a deep sadness in his eyes. In Arthur's hands was a large gift basket, inside of which wasn't expensive wine or Belgian chocolate, but dozens of neatly stacked packets of Sunbeam cookies. Next to it was a white envelope. "I've come to repay a debt," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "The debt from that day at the supermarket, and also the debt I've owed this house and my mother for the past 15 years. Chloe didn't know what to say. Before she could react, Arthur placed the gift basket and the envelope in her hands, gave a slight nod, and turned to leave. Inside the envelope was not a check, but a legal document. Chloe's family, just a few hours later, received a call from the bank, informing them that their entire mortgage had been paid in full. A few days later, another letter arrived, announcing the establishment of the Lily Scholarship Fund, a trust that would cover all of the girls' educational expenses up to the most prestigious universities. But for Arthur, this was only the beginning. Money can fix mistakes, but it can't heal wounds. He established the Margaret Legacy Fund, named after his mother, with a single mission, not charity, but the rebirth of the Oakwood neighborhood. Arthur didn't sit in an office and direct from afar. He moved into the modest hotel and was in the neighborhood every day. He bought the friendly corner grocery supermarket, renovated it to be more spacious and cleaner, but he asked to keep the name and the old employees, simply giving them a raise. A vacant, garbage-filled lot, which children were afraid to approach, was leveled in preparation for a new green park. A plan to build a modern community library with a free computer lab for children was initiated. However, the return of the lost son was not met with a red carpet. Suspicion covered the neighborhood like a thick fog. At a community meeting held at the old elementary school playground, Arthur stood before dozens of familiar yet unfamiliar faces, trying to present his plan. And then, an older man with white hair and a face etched with time stood up. It was Mr. Miller, an old neighbor, a fishing buddy of Arthur's father. He leaned on his wooden cane, stepping forward, his old eyes boring into Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton," Mr. Miller's voice was sharp, echoing in the silence. "Do you think you can just throw money around and buy back the past? Do you think a few parks and new buildings can erase the 15 years you abandoned this place?" He paused, his voice choked with emotion. "Where were you when your mother needed you most? When she sat alone every afternoon waiting for you? Where were you when this neighborhood slowly decayed? When your old friends had to sell their homes and move away one by one? We don't need your pity." Mr. Miller's words were like a thunderclap, sparking all the simmering doubts in the hearts of the others. Whispers arose. "It's probably just a PR stunt. Be careful, he's just trying to buy up cheap land. What does a billionaire know about our suffering?" Arthur stood silently on the podium, taking each word like a dagger. He didn't argue, didn't make excuses. He simply bowed his head, humbly. "You're right, Mr. Miller. I was wrong, and no amount of money can make up for that." The next day, no magnificent construction crew appeared. Instead, the residents of Oakwood saw an incredible sight. Arthur Pendleton, the billionaire, was wearing work clothes and gloves, single-handedly cleaning up the rubble and garbage at the lot intended for the park. He worked tirelessly under the hot sun, his shirt soaked with sweat. He picked up every broken brick, pulled every rusty piece of metal. At first, people just watched from a distance, curious and skeptical. But he just kept working, from morning until night, day after day. On the third day, Chloe and her husband brought him water. Then they rolled up their sleeves and helped. Lily trotted along, picking up small pieces of trash and putting them in a bag. Gradually, a few other neighbors, moved by his persistence and sincerity, also began to bring out their shovels and hoes. And then, at the end of the week, Mr. Miller himself, after days of watching from his porch, quietly brought out a wheelbarrow and started cleaning up another corner. They didn't say much to each other, but their actions spoke for themselves. Trust isn't built with promises, but with shared sweat. The old, forgotten neighborhood suddenly burst with new life, not just from money, but from a unity reborn from the ashes of skepticism. On the day of the Margaret Pendleton Community Library's inauguration, Arthur didn't stand on a high podium as a benefactor. He stood blended into the crowd, next to Chloe and Lily. The person who went up to the podium to speak was Mr. Miller, now the head of the community's management committee. Mr. Miller's voice trembled with emotion. Many of us, including myself, were once skeptical, but one person taught us that redemption isn't in words, but in actions. He didn't return as a king, but as a neighbor, a son. Then he turned to Arthur, inviting him to the stage. When Arthur stepped up, he didn't talk about numbers or grand plans. He recounted the story of the denied credit card. Then he projected an image of Lily's pink plastic piggy bank onto the large screen. "My true legacy," he said, looking straight into the eyes of his neighbors, his voice thick with emotion, "didn't start with the billions of dollars in my account, but it began with the coins in this piggy bank. Lily taught me that giving isn't about when you have too much, but when you know that someone else needs it more than you do. And all of you," he looked at Mr. Miller, at Chloe, at the familiar faces, "have taught me that trust cannot be bought with money. It must be built with sweat, sincerity, and time." His legacy was reborn. It was no longer cold lines of code or soulless numbers on the stock market. It was the laughter of children in the new park, the warm light streaming from the library window at night, the trusting nod of a community he could finally, proudly, call home.